Okay. Meeting of the Somerville Planning Board for August 23rd, 2023 will please come to order. This meeting is being held in compliance with the Open Public Meeting Act. Copy of the notice specifying a date, time, and location is one posted on the bulletin board outside Borough Hall, 2 mailed to the Messenger Gazette and Courier News, 3 given to the clerk administrator. Any member of this body believes that this meeting is being held in violation of the Open Public Meeting Act. Please state your views at this time and specify the reasons supporting your belief that the notice is improper. Hearing none, we'll move on to the next item, which is roll call.
Chairman Novato?
Here.
Ms. Lozinski? Mayor Sullivan? Councilman Broom?
Here.
Mr. Adair? Mr. Akins?
Here.
Mr. Kraska?
Here.
Mr. Prestes?
Here.
Mr. Cleveland?
Here.
Mr. Addicks?
Here.
Ms. Warner? Here.
I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, approval of minutes for August 9th, 2023.
So moved.
Second. Any additions or corrections?
Chairman Novato?
Yes.
Ms. Lozinski? Oh, I'm sorry. Councilman Broom?
Yes.
Mr. Akins?
Yes.
Mr. Kraska?
Yes.
Mr. Prestes?
Yes.
Mr. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mr. Addicks?
Wasn't here last meeting.
And Ms. Warner?
Was not here.
Okay, I don't believe we have any resolutions tonight. So that brings us to our hearing for the evening, Foundry Holdings LLC.
Ladies and gentlemen of the board, good evening. Rob Simon here from Carroll Law. I'm here on behalf of the applicant who has filed an application, excuse me, before the planning board for a preliminary and final site plan approval, as well as various variances and exceptions and or redevelopment plan deviation relief with regard to properties located here in Somerville, 50 James Street and 82 Fairview Avenue. This is block 50, lots 2 and 2.01. The property was declared in need of redevelopment under the local redevelopment housing law. It's located in the borough's R3 zone as a redevelopment overlay zone as part of the Kirby Avenue redevelopment area, and is subject to the borough's Kirby Avenue vision and redevelopment plan. The application this evening before you contemplates 112 multi-family housing development. It's 50 one-bedroom units and 62 two-bedroom units are being proposed, consisting of 2 4-story buildings, which will also include approximately 208 parking spaces, 30 bicycle spaces provided inside the buildings, as well as various site plan amenities that we'll get into through the course of our presentation. While the application does contemplate a permitted use within the subject redevelopment zoning district, to the extent required, we will be asking for various relief, including variance relief that requires that parking under the ordinance only located in the side and rear yards, and we do have some parking located in the front yard that we'll get into. Under the redevelopment plan, it prohibits flat roofs, and the application proposes to have as part of their architectural amenities some flat roofs that, again, we'll get into. And we do have some design exceptions that we will be requesting relief for. One thing, just for clarification, there was a note on Mr. Cole's report regarding signage. As you'll hear from the architect, we intend to fully conform with all applicable signage ordinances, so we will not be needing any type of relief with regard to signage. And obviously, as the hearing progresses, to the extent we need any variance, exception, RSIS, or other types of relief or interpretations, we'll be asking that from the board. Tonight, the way we intend to proceed is as follows. We first are going to have The principals of the applicant, Greg and Ryan Storms, provide some brief testimony, just give you a little bit of a background and why they're here with this project. And then from there, we're going to turn to Dave Stiers, the engineer on the project, John Sirocco, licensed architect, and then finish up with Gary Dean, who's going to be providing some traffic and professional planning testimony. So,
Okay, and before we start, I want to explain the procedure. We have a lot of public here tonight.
thank you.
What I want to do is hear all of the testimony because many of your questions may be answered by a subsequent witness. And at the end of the presentation, and once we go through the various reports we have, you will be given an opportunity to speak. Please confine your comments to 5 minutes and address your comments to me. And if we could swear in all of your witnesses ahead of time, and I will stipulate that all of the witnesses have testified before this board before we accept their credentials. So, Jamie, you want to swear them in?
Sure, so I see Ryan, Greg, John, Dave is here, right there, and there is Gary Dean making an appearance as only. So, yeah, we're gonna, before you sit down, we're gonna have all our witnesses come on up and we're gonna get sworn.
If you could answer one at a time and state your name and spell your name for the record for the ease of the reporter. And I'll ask the question all at once and then you can each answer individually. Each of you as witnesses swear or affirm to tell the truth and nothing but the truth in your testimony this evening.
Yes, I did.
Can you please state or spell your name for the record?
Sure, John Sirocco, Saracco. I'm the architect for the project. Office is located in Houston, New Jersey.
Thank you.
Yes, I do. Ryan Storms, STO, RMS, and I'm one of the managing members of the application.
Thank you.
Greg Storms, managing member. Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Yes, David Stiers, professional engineer, and consultant engineer for the project.
Yes, I do as well. Gary Dean, DEA, and professional engineer and planner for the applicant.
Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, let me first call up Gregory Storms, please. It's up to the board.
Real quick, I'll be real quick. Greg Storms, managing member of Foundry Holdings. Here to introduce our latest project, Foundry. Brief history of the Storms family for those of you who are not familiar with us. My dad, Don Storms, who is here with us tonight, started investing in the late 1970s in Somerville, and we managed many buildings on Main Street and throughout the borough of Somerville. I want to introduce my son Ryan, who is now the third generation, who will briefly elaborate on our latest project, Foundry.
How are everyone? Ryan Storms, I'm Greg's son. I just want to talk briefly about the project, I guess as a whole. It's 112 units that we feel is to be a real benefit to the borough. You know, it's a little bit about me. I'll let our professionals get more into the building, but I started around 2018 working with you know, our family business, a little bit more so on the back end and actually appearing in front of the board. So I deal with a lot of the technicalities once we get through with the hearing itself. Lucky enough to be in front of you today, and I really truly think we have something that not only we can be proud of as residents of the borough, but you know, the borough as a whole can as well. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg. So with that, I'm going to call Dave Stiers, the professional engineer on the project. So, Mr. Chairman, understanding that his credentials have been accepted as an expert in the field of professional planning, we'll proceed with this testimony. So, Dave, you're familiar with the application and the site plan, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you prepared the site plan,
Yes,
and you're familiar with the property and the surrounding neighborhood?
I am.
Okay,
Yes.
do you, before we start your testimony, do you have any exhibits that you wish to mark?
Yes, this is a kind of a compilation of our site plan, so it has extra layers on it. For example, the utility plans in there, the landscaping plan, so it's superimposed a couple of.
Can you just provide the last revision date, and then we'll mark that A1 if that's okay?
The date of the plan is 7/21/23. It says rendering site plan 50 James Street. A1, did you say?
Yes. Okay. So with that, if you can describe the project from an engineering perspective, including a review of the various site plan elements of the application, maybe starting with the property itself.
Yeah, the existing property is an old industrial site with an out parcel, a residential property that is located on Fairview, and behind it, with a single-family house on it. And behind that is the industrial property that was the old truck form property, which maintained and built trucks and had a lot of older equipment and stuff on the site for a long period of time. There's a existing masonry building in the southeast corner of the property, and then there's a lot of laydown areas made up of macadam, recycled asphalt, and stone areas, and it's approximately 80% covered at the current time. It's surrounded, the industrial site surrounded by a fence, and with respect to the neighborhood, to the south you have the railroad right of way. To the west is the Kensington bus property, which is located on Lozier Avenue. Just north of the Kensington is residential, which kind of wraps around to the north, and also to the east of the property is residential, 1, 2, 3, 4 families, and also multi-families in the back corner of the property on the east side. With respect to the proposal, in the dark gray, you can see the two buildings, and basically in a horseshoe shape facing Fairview. There is the bridge that connects the two buildings on the upper floors, and we have one-way parking, or a one-way driveway coming in off Fairview on the west side, entering and then exiting on the east side, and then the access to the parking in the back, which is basically for the tenants, is underneath the bridge between the two buildings, and there's a surface parking in the rear. To the north of the, what I would call the guest parking in front of the building, is like a rain garden that picks up a portion of the site runoff, and more of the volume, or a majority of the volume, heads in a southwesterly direction. You can see those black dashes. They're actually an underground pipe system that would then, through an agreement with Kensington Bus, drain down to Lozier Avenue and tie into an existing system down Lozier Avenue. The project proposes, with respect to lighting, 18-foot high, kind of decorative lights. The client picked those out to kind of match the foundry theme that we're proposing here. We did a little bit lower lights than permitted by the ordinance. The ordinance allows for 25. We went with the 18-footers. Landscaping, we have a landscape architect who we've been working with for about 5 or 6 years, designing the landscape for the project, and we've had a great success rate with Henry over the last 5 years, and we're proud of what he's been able to provide to my clientele, and I think it's an excellent plan. We can get into zoning, I guess.
Yeah, why don't you talk a little bit about, I'm gonna ask you some specific questions about your various site plan elements. So you can just go over the zoning for the property, including the bulk standards and compliance.
Okay, so we're in the redevelopment plan in the R3 redevelopment zone. 3 acre minimum lot requirement is required. We're at 4.58. Frontage requirement is 80 feet, we're at 470, which is also compliant. Minimum front yard setback is 20 feet, we are at the 20-foot requirement. Side yard setback, 1 is 8 feet and 20 is 2. And in working with the redevelopment committee, when we initially started this project, we actually shifted the buildings back. I think we were originally at 10 feet off of Fairview. We shifted the buildings back to 20 feet. We also shifted the buildings to the east to provide 17 feet on the western sideline and 11 feet on that James Street frontage. So we shifted it about 9 feet greater than the 8-foot minimum on the west side. Minimum rear yard is 35, we're at like 195 feet. FAR allowed is 0.85, we're at 0.83. Density is 25 dwelling units per acre, which we are at. And as I indicated earlier, maximum improved lot coverage is allowed to be 70%. It currently is 79.5%, and we're reducing that to 65.9%. Last thing on our zoning chart is the building height allowed is 4 stories and 50 feet, and we are at 4 stories and 48 feet. So all of those items are conforming.
Dave, you also have an indication on your site plan about parking requirements.
Yes, and in accordance with the RSIS requirements, we are required to have 214 spaces, and with the governor's credits, which is basically 10% of that number, you can subtract 21 spaces if you provide for EVs charging stations, which we are doing. So the requirement for this project is 193 spaces, and we're providing 208 spaces. And as I indicated, there's in the front of the property, we have 12 spaces at angle parking. We have 2 ADA spaces for each building in the front, as well as 2 drop-off areas. So we're trying to keep the tenants visitors and the drop-offs and the UPS and the DoorDash and all that out front, so it's not mingling with the parking in the rear of the property.
So before I'm going to have you go through some of the specific design elements, if you can just identify on the plan for the benefit of the board where the relief is sought. So in other words, if you heard me talk earlier about various variants or exceptional relief. So just so that the board and the public can orient themselves, one of the requirements is that parking is only allowed in the rear and the side yard, and we're proposing some parking in the front yard. Can you just identify where that is for the benefit of the board?
Yeah, the parking on the north side of the building is considered in the front yard. So the loop area where we have the 12 spaces, we have the drop-off and the ADA spaces for both buildings on the east and the west side of the project are requested variance relief.
And then
And I would note that the front yard setback is 20 feet and the parking is substantially further back than the required front yard setback.
but because the parking is technically in front of a part of the building, that is why we're
Yes.
requesting. I know Mr. Sirocco will get into the redevelopment plan deviation regarding the flat roof, but just briefly regarding the design exceptions. One of them is that there's supposed to be 1 shade tree for every 5 parking spaces, and that the application requires 42 shade trees, and we're providing 20 feet, correct?
Yes. And basically, and I talked to Henry about this, basically, as these trees mature, there's really not enough room to provide those additional trees on this particular development.
There's also design exception relief being requested by the applicant with regard to required lighting uniformity ratios and no direct sky reflected glare exceeding 0.5 foot candles.
Yes, and the ratio is 4.8 and the allowable in the ordinance is 4.0. And I can testify that, the 18-foot height, which we're trying to lower and make a little more attractive rather than a 25-foot height, provides a little bit more intensity underneath each of the lights and skews that ratio up a bit. So we would request the relief, rather than provide 25-foot high lights with a better ratio, we're looking to lower the lights to 18 feet, and the ratio gets a little skewed. And then with respect to light spillage, we provided four street lights along Fairview Avenue, and those 4 street lights provide levels in the right of way that exceed the 0.5 foot candles, and we think that for purposes of providing safe access along the sidewalk, that is a waiver that should be granted, and it does not intensify the lighting on the opposite side of Fairview Avenue. So our lighting plan, which is in the packet, if you look at that, at the right of way on the north side of Fairview, the intensity is 0.0, so there's no increase in intensity on the opposite side.
And then finally, just to identify and orient the relief that's being sought before this board, there's a requirement that one-way driveways should not be, I think, less than 10 feet, no more than 15 feet in width if only one travel lane is proposed, and the application here is proposing a single one-way driveway 24 feet in width. So can you just identify that and describe that?
So this ingress on the west side off of Fairview circles around on one way and exits out on the east side. Couple reasons why it's 24 feet wide. One is when you have parking perpendicular, even though it's one way, you still need 24 feet to get out of those parking spaces. The angle parkings require a little bit less, but we also wanted to make it a little bit wider because of the activity in front of the building. And we also received comments, I believe, from the fire marshal that indicated that he preferred an additional width for circulation with the emergency apparatus.
Very good. So I know that Mr. Cole issued a report, I believe, most recently dated August 16, 2023, that included a review of certain, if not all, of the various site plan elements. And I think what I'd like to do, Dave, is that instead of just kind of going through the report, line by line, I'm going to just identify what I believe are various comments or questions that require testimony from you. In fact, was asked to provide some testimony so that we can try to cover them in an expedient manner. So one of the questions had to do with spot grades, for the driveway curb ramps along Fairview and for the surface parking area crosswalks, and about the slope of those curb ramps.
Yeah, and I actually talked to Michael about it. He indicated that he, in checking our work, that it was right up to the maximum allowed by ADA, and I agree with him, and we will look to improve that so that during construction that we don't exceed the maximum allowed by law.
There was also a comment that addressed the issue of installing private fire hydrants in the vicinity of the surface parking lot. I believe that was a comment that was made by Mr. Cole, and I believe there was also a comment, a similar comment that was contained in the fire marshal's report.
Yeah. I think we're going to defer to Greg on that, right?
Sure.
I mean, the request is to provide, so we have, just so the boards understand, we have an existing fire hydrant on the north side of Fairview here, and on the north side of Fairview, or this area here. And our proposal right now is to extend the water line and provide a hydrant on the south side of Fairview Avenue. I understand that the fire marshal is looking for a loop system with hydrants behind the buildings for fighting fires.
So that would be something that Greg Storms will address and get back to you. There is a request that the pressed concrete curbs be used at locations where the plans are depicting granite block curbing. Is there any issue with that?
We made, excuse me, we made that change and it just didn't get onto the plans, but that we've already made. So yes, we'll do that.
There was a comment about, with regard to the width of the one-way entrance and exit driveway of 24 feet, with the proposed driveway flares of 44 feet, I believe.
Yeah, we are proposing 10-foot radiuses at each of the driveways, both on the east and west side of the egress and egress, which is modest in nature and for the purpose of emergency services for better access coming in and out of that project.
My understanding is that the fire marshal would do that as well.
He did, and commented that he agreed with wider.
With regard to site utilities, there was a comment regarding transformers,
Yes.
right? And the question is that whether the locations that are being proposed have been approved by PSCG.
They have not, but we will work with them, it's a step-by-step process. We place them internal to each of the buildings and behind the front facade so that they're not sticking out in the front yard. And we believe it's appropriate, and we will work with PSCG to secure their approval. And if it requires modification, you'll have to come back and speak to the planning.
There was also a comment regarding or questioning whether hot boxes would be required and by New Jersey American Water.
Hot boxes are required if you're greater than 30 feet from the curb line. The garage is set right about 30 feet. And the plan is to not have hot boxes if they're gigantic or unsightly. And that was one of the purposes of the 20-foot setback. Once we slid it back, that would trigger the hot box. So we're confident that in working with New Jersey American Water that we will not require hot boxes.
And with regard to the emergency preparedness plan that the applicant presented or provided, there is a request by Mike to provide testimony regarding the sound generators and generators of the property complying with NJAC 7:29 for noise controls for both daytime and nighttime.
Yeah, I haven't seen the data, but I can state that, the generators do come with noise calculations, and if there's additional requirements, you can use mufflers and baffles and all kinds. So there's ways to modify it to make it compliant. And I think that's a testimony that if it's non-compliant, we'll make it compliant.
With regard to waste management and sanitary sewer flows, there was a comment about a capacity to accommodate the additional effort.
Yeah, Mike has requested flow meters, which is typical for larger projects, and we would agree to provide those flow meters. We just need to know locations and we'll get them out there and do the testing necessary.
I think there was also a question or a comment with regard to payment of sanitary sewer connection fees. And your understanding in speaking to the applicant that because there's apparently a pending sale of the sanitary sewer system to New Jersey American Water, there's a request to defer that payment to see if that transaction will take place. Correct?
That's correct, yes.
And that in any event that the SRVSA connection fees would be paid prior to final compliance review.
That's correct, yes.
We want to talk just for a minute about stormwater management.
Yeah, so Mike and I took a seminar last week, and there's new regulations out as of July 17th. The project was designed based on the 2021 design criteria. I reached out to NJDEP shortly after that seminar and sent them kind of a blurb of the history of this project, and the DEP responded. She was actually the person that provided the seminar. She came back and said she believes that we are grandfathered from the 2024 regulations because we filed before July 17th, and the project was deemed complete prior to that date as well. So the report and the design that you see on the colored rendering was based on the 2021 design criteria, and we will be proceeding in that manner. And there's some soils testing that will be required for infiltration, and maybe not infiltration due to soil conditions, which was another DEP request by me, and I sent that to Mike, and we're working through some of the nuances to this new criteria, which are complicated at best.
Dave, did you get that in writing from DEP?
I got an email, yes.
Okay.
Yep. I got an email on that and also the infiltration things. And Mike has asked me to follow up on the infiltration stuff because we didn't see it in the regulations, and we will comply. Once we get the soils testing done, we'll further verify that.
Did you forward that to Mike?
I forwarded both emails to Mike, yes.
Dave, let's move on to the landscaping plan. And I heard your testimony earlier that you've been working with your landscaper for many years to come up with what you believe is an attractive product, taking into consideration a lot of factors, including the surrounding area. Mike Cole has made a bunch of recommendations with regard to site landscaping, and the applicant doesn't have any objection to implementing this, correct?
No.
Okay, so you comply with the entire landscaping section?
Yeah.
Better.
Right, so that,
Three plant variations, species, and then the detail.
Okay.
Basically detail.
right, when you're talking about details, I think there were certain landscaping notes that were omitted that should have been included. And I think they were identified or delineated.
I think Dave has it right. I think there's 3 species of plants to be changed. The rest of it's details and clarifications, including
You got a
irrigation.
little too detailed on the poisonous one.
I had to. I was questioned on it, Dave. It wasn't my doing.
So there was a question actually from Mike with regard to landscaping, and it specifically noted that the properties located across the street from the exit driveway, block 48 lots 9.01 and 9.02, will allegedly receive some glare from headlights, and Mr. Cole states that consideration should be given to installing some evergreen shrubs on the north side of Fairview Avenue to provide some buffering.
You have an objection to that, or? If the,
Well, for the, no,
I'll chime in real quick just to pose potential easements and things like that that would be relevant.
I don't think it would be an easement. I think we just have to have authorization from the property owners to do it.
Without a doubt.
If there's no objection from the property owners, we can work with them, come up with a plan. That would do it?
Dave, that assumes that there is a glare issue. It appears on paper there is.
You're talking about the exit driveway?
Yes. I'm saying you have two dwellings that are offset slightly from the exit drive. It appears on paper that there's gonna be headlight glare, particularly in the wintertime, you have a lot of dark hours. So I'm saying it looks on paper that there's gonna be an impact and the shrubs would mitigate that to a certain extent. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I don't think we have an objection to that, but if that's, for example, two driveways,
Yes.
maybe we can't. So we have to look into it further.
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying, look at the actual, where the motorist is, where's the house? What is the apex angle there? And with the driveways, and obviously there's a driveway, you can't put shrubs in the driveway, so just drill down to see if it's actually an impact.
Yeah.
So, moving on to lighting, and I know you touched upon certain aspects of it, but I just want to drill down to Mike's, using Mike's verbiage. With regard, there was a question about, or a comment, that the light trespass along Fairview Avenue helps to illuminate the public sidewalk. It does not appear to impact the properties located on the north side of the street. The applicant should provide testimony whether there's any other light trespass.
There is no other light trespass signs.
Then there was a question about whether the site lighting can be reduced to security lighting during the early morning hours when that on-site activity is minimal.
Yes. Yes.
And that site lighting will have illumination dimming capacity. There was a comment about that. Correct?
Yes.
Right. And there's also a comment the applicant should provide testimony whether the illumination levels include the streetlights located along Fairview Avenue, and that the existing streetlights should be included in the design of the streetlight.
The existing streetlights were not included in the illumination calculation. And as I stated earlier, the illumination on the, pretty much from the center line of Fairview over is zero. So there is really no impact to the opposite side of the street. So I don't know if that would be necessary.
So I think, according to my notes, I think we hit on, and I know there's a lot of other comments that the architect and Mr. Dean will cover. But I think in terms of just pure engineering questions and comments, I believe that Mr. Steyer's addressed and picked on those.
Okay, so there's nothing outstanding from your perspective in your letter here?
From an engineering perspective, it's really the fire marshal's call. Based on my review, I don't think a 40-foot apron is needed for fire trucks, but if it's needed from public safety, absolutely. I questioned it because it's a 24-foot driveway with another 20 feet of an apron, which is wide. And the testimony is that the fire marshal requested for the trucks to better circulate out into the road. Absolutely, if that's the case. Sure, I just need some document. I just don't, in the turning radiuses I've seen it, I don't see that. But if it's the case, it's the case. It was originally 54 feet wide. Just so the board knows, we met with the applicant and the plans were revised and a draft engineering report was done. And then the applicant cleaned it up and it went from 54 to 44. So that's the history of it. And I asked the question at 54 and if it's needed, it's needed.
Yeah, I mean, if you're coming down and heading east on Fairview, so you're next relatively close to the curve and you swing in there, it's a 10-foot radius, just, so your back wheels don't run up all over the curve. So same going, coming out of that the project. The 10-foot radius is not a big radius. I mean, typically for emergency service vehicles, it's 25 feet. For larger wheelbase vehicles, it's 25 feet, so a 10-foot radius is not. And it goes down to 24 feet, 10 feet.
I get it.
So,
If it's
yeah,
needed,
it's
it's needed.
just-
I just don't want
it's
to.
a sweep.
Right, I'm just looking to,
Yeah.
if it's an excessive sweep, it just causes pedestrian crossing issues.
Yeah.
If we can lower it, great. If we can't, we can't. It's a public safety, it's a fire truck issue. If it's needed, it's needed.
Okay. So, with that, I have no further questions at this time for Mr. Stein.
Anybody from the board have questions? Okay.
Talked about PSC&G indoor transformers. The transformers that we're talking about PSC&G, are they gonna be recessed into the building or in the building?
No, that's,
There's a pad mounted transformer shown there.
Okay, yeah, that's what I'm asking, I thought you said something about you had to get approval from PSC&G about
yeah.
where they were gonna
They're on
go.
the inside corner on the
Oh,
west
okay.
building, and then the inside corner of the building.
Thank you, that's all.
I think the architect will cover, but they're proposing all the utilities, meters in the basements close to the road with external access.
Yes.
So they're showing the transformers right there in very close proximity. I think the intent is to put all utilities in the basement to eliminate the aesthetic issues.
That's right.
Now, question about the shade trees in the parking lot. That's a lot of trees, and it's gonna create, I call it a heat island, it's just gonna bake out without extra trees in the middle of the parking area. That's kind of the point of how we did it in other places. That's a lot of trees not to have in, just for basic shade. They're like missing like 16 trees or something like that, you know?
Stuff like that,
Something like that, yeah.
I can tell you, Larry, in order to get an island in there, we're pushing the parking lot pretty tight to the railroad. And, we're trying to keep that setback 20 feet in
What
front.
about like the diamonds that they have over at the ShopRite?
My experience is they're tough to keep alive. We've done it in other areas and kind of shy away. We do have a couple extra parking spaces, and we can make a couple more islands.
Well, I mean, it's gonna be hot, it's gonna get hot, it's gonna bake.
Understood.
Having the shade is gonna help everybody.
Dave, we didn't talk about, there's a request to get an easement from the property owner to the east. The surface parking lot only has access to one area underneath the connection between the buildings. And I understand it's private property. I don't know if it's you or Greg, I had mentioned just best efforts to try to get emergency access easement to get into the parking lot from the road to the east, but it's private property.
Yeah, Greg, I'll let Greg talk about it.
Yeah,
But
Dave,
I'll
it's not you,
just
it's not.
explain what's going on. So
Yeah.
James Street comes in the southerly direction, and at this point here, it goes private.
Right.
And the talk was to try to provide something back here so that we could get an emergency vehicle in or out.
I'm in the this for the record, in the southeast.
Southeast corner from the neighboring apartment complex. You want me to mention it, or do you want to talk about it? We did reach out to the neighbor, and the neighbor was not receptive to that,
Okay, I mean,
providing that.
I just had mentioned best efforts because.
Yeah,
it
we
made
have an
sense.
email, we have an email from them, so we did reach out to them.
Okay. Would you
Could
provide
that benefit them too?
I mean, if James Street was blocked, I mean, they have access on the opposite side, so.
I don't think so, Larry.
No, I'm just, you know.
You just shoot us that email.
We'll do.
Anybody else?
Are we gonna try doing anything with the trees at all? Missing shade
I
trees?
mean,
It's a lot of them. It's
yeah,
a
I
significant
mean,
amount.
every 2 spaces I lose, I can put an island in and another tree.
Yeah.
My observation is that, and they're not really shade trees, they're decorative trees over on West Main Street, but they've survived in the islands, those little diamonds.
In front of ShopRite Day, he's talking about in front of ShopRite.
Yeah, they're like locusts, right? Small leaves.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we could try it, you know,
I think Larry has a point.
yeah.
You know, a few more trees are gonna make it better. Make it better.
So you're willing to look into that in terms of, having this diamond islands?
You know, we're gonna have irrigation. I think the real thing is that, you know, that they have a limited root structure. They're gonna need to be taken care of. Otherwise, you know, a lot of times the car sits on top of them and heats them up, and, you know, it causes problems.
I agree with the landscape architect, that the perimeter, we can't put even trees. The spacing's correct along the perimeter. The only thing left is what Larry says, is within the lot, right?
Yeah, it looks to me like you could easily get another 4 to 6 trees in there.
With the diamonds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You willing to do that?
Sure.
Okay. You have something there?
Fire hydrants, we're talking about that later. Yeah, we're gonna wait for Greg, I think, just to supplement those testimonies. Okay, and there were also questions from the fire marshal about EVs charging near the building,
There are no EVs about it.
not the ones in.
Well, there's one in the front.
Okay.
On each side. We can talk to him about it. We wanted to provide one for, you know, guests or.
How close to the building is it?
Not that close, 15, 20 feet, 20 feet.
That's still pretty close.
Yeah, Lisa, the code requires some accessible spaces to be EV charging. So that's why I think they're in the front. And we'll get into what Roger says with the other testimony. Some of the concern is we have an electric fire or car in this
I know, I deal with it every day.
So I guess the architect or Greg's going to deal with that question on the hydrants.
I think that's it too. Right.
Okay,
I just have one other question.
so,
Can you just go over again the stormwater that you're tapping into? You said for the property next to, what is that?
Right now, the existing site drains down to a little teeny inlet here, and that dash line runs across out the Lozier.
And you're referring to the southwestern corner?
Southwest, yeah, sorry about that.
Okay.
And so the southeast corner, we have a new stormwater system, that's the only pipe system there. We're proposing a new discharge along their property line and the common rail line down the Lozier to that same discharge. So we've talked to Kensington, I forget the guy's name, but an agreement in place to install that pipe. And then this one, you know, if he wants to further develop this site, that thing can go away at some future date.
Okay.
What Dave is saying is that the stormwater pipe's going to tie into a stormwater manhole on the adjoining property and have an easement.
That's what I thought it is.
Yeah, there's a connection to the manhole.
anybody else? Okay, what are your next witness?
Okay, so I think that to be responsive to some of the comments, I'm gonna have Greg just address
Okay.
two issues, or one will be the easy one because Dave already dealt with it, which is just to confirm before I get ready. Come on. Just to, first, just to confirm about the fact that you did in fact reach out to the adjoining property owner and that is correct.
Right. So yeah, several weeks ago, we reached out to the adjoining property owner, and their response was, you know, there are encumbrances and stuff associated with their lot that they're not necessarily looking to, you know, move forward with unless it's required by code or they're compelled to, and that's kind of where we left it. We reached out in good faith to Bob, the fire marshal, Bob Lynn, and that was the response we got.
Okay.
And then Greg, there was a question that was raised about the fire hydrant or hydrants in the park.
Yeah, correct. And so And Ryan, if I forget something, help me out with this. So we originally had designed our building with a lot of consideration for fire. First off, you've heard a lot of I've been in front of the board many times of 13 versus 13R. And we decided to do a 13 system, not a 13R system, which hasn't been mentioned yet. And so the code, even though the code does allow us to do a 13R system, we thought in good faith to do a 13 system.
Just before you go on, just explain very simply what's the difference.
What's the difference between the two is a 13 system basically provides more coverage, bathrooms,
Cavities.
things like that. There's exceptions if cavities can be filled with insulation. There's a lot of different rules, but basically provides more coverage and in the building. So we provide a lot of testimony. We provide a lot of room for emergency access. When we designed the building, we agreed to move the fire hydrant from Fairview to the front corner of the easterly side of the building. We had discussions with the fire marshal, and we never heard back until this afternoon. Honestly, we heard back once. We wanted one fire hydrant, and then it was 2 fire hydrants. And we really don't think that we need a fire hydrant in the rear of the building. There's plenty of access. We have a bridge that's crossing over that John will touch on in a minute, and we have plenty of access for the fire trucks and the emergency management equipment to get to the rear of the building. So that's our position on the fire hydrant.
I'll add supplementary to that real quick. We met with Bob a couple times on this, and everything else on his memorandum we totally agree with and have we're fully willing and have the capability to implement in the project.
So I guess, so Ryan, when you're, I'm sorry, just one second.
Sure.
So when you're talking about his memorandum, just so the record's clear, so there is a memorandum from Mr. Lynn, Somerville fire official, dated August 10th, 2023, that contains 22 enumerated items. Items 11 and 12 we dealt with because that required permission from Parkview, which unfortunately we did not obtain, although we tried it, exerting, as Mr. Paul said, our best efforts. And of the other items, comprising 22 of them, you're going to comply with all of them. And the only issue that we're talking about right now is number 15 on the August 10th, 2023, Robert Lynn Jr. memorandum, correct, Ryan?
That is correct.
Is it a good time for me to ask a question?
Sure.
Fantastic. So my question is, with 15, what is the hesitation or desire not to install a hydrant in the rear of the building? According to the design, the hydrants are on the street of Fairview, one towards the entrance and one at the intersection of Fairview and James, which would be a significant lay for a fire hydrant into the rear of the building, with no access on either side for them to be able, as we talked about with not being able to share the driveway. So from a firefighting standpoint, why would we not put, to ensure the safety of the rear exposure, a hydrant in the rear?
Well, it is a code question, and John might be able to elaborate on it, but we can go up to 600 feet is the code that says that when you have a fully suppressed building, either 13 or 13R, you're allowed 600 feet around from the fire hydrant to around either access of the building. And that's our reason for we have that access, and we made it very, very good access through the back of the building, and so we feel that that's not necessary. And that's the code that says we don't need the access because of the 600 feet rule.
Okay, and I understand completely the code, I get that entirely. Again, my concern is the rear exposure, especially with how many EV spots do you have in the back end there? How how many spots are there for dual charging? 43 EV charging slots. You know, and I know based on the comments here on number 15 that it's recommended to be able to have those hydrants there just due to the amount of water that would be necessary. If we have to have multiple engines back there to have the one hydrant, and I'm sure Mr. Lynn brought this up in his discussion, to have that one hydrant or two and have to lay that distance would definitely slow down the process of addressing those concerns, addressing that fire at that time and that exposure.
I just simply go, and also, Roger, it's the annual cost of a fire, of the fire hydrant. There's no, you know, and what fire, Bob's first memorandum is he wanted one fire hydrant. The second memorandum says he wanted two with a loop on it, so I'm not quite sure what he wants. Yeah, and that's our reason for it. I don't think it's necessary.
I'll supplement a little bit if I may, other than the cost. I also am a New Jersey American liaison, so to speak. I operate the majority of the construction during the project. In order to get a hydrant, you know, back to, I believe this is where Bob would want it.
Ryan, can you identify where you're referring to it on the plan?
Yes, to an island located in the rear of the property. In order to get a main, New Jersey American would like to want a separate, you know, separate meter for that, you know, additional one or two hydrants, whether 1 or 2 meters per hydrant, I'm not entirely sure of. So their main is coming down James Street. In order to get water service all the way back to here, it just poses an a relatively significant task to do that, and you run into other issues that may arise, such as where would they want their meter? Can the meter be located somewhere in here on this parcel, running down parallel to the adjacent development?
You're talking about the James Street extension?
Correct, James Street extension to what's known as Park Place or Park View. And that just poses significant challenges. I'm sure they could be overcome, but I don't quite know how New Jersey American would tackle that from a construction standpoint. Typically, they won't let us take it off one of our services that are coming into the building. That's just one of the policies, that it can't be fed with water, so to speak, from a service that, you know, feeds the building. That takes away, that draws from the actual volume that would come into the building, and that necessarily it's not always good to draw water away from the building coming in to suppress fire to an external source.
Potentially, they might even want a hot box, correct?
They likely would. I don't know for a fact how it works for a building. If it's more than 30 feet and a hot box is required, I don't necessarily know if a fire hydrant has similar constraints or not. I can't really testify to that one way or the other. But again, you know, the public water line is pointing to it if that's acceptable to everybody. And in order to get it privately all the way back over and around to here, poses a challenge. Just from a construction standpoint, not really considering cost, just feasibility, and it's a very, I think, unique situation. I'm sure they have policies or procedures to do it, but that's one of our reasons we're averse to doing that, as well as the code issue, obviously. So.
And I respect that, and I understand hypotheticals, and I get it. We're not sure what it would be and how it would get there. My concern is that there's no one is ever going to say, you know, you went above the code and that's bad. So just in thinking about this, again, from a standpoint of what you're going to be putting back there, all the EVs, the fact that, you know, you have the footbridge that goes across, you know, all of those things, considering all of those things, I'm sure, and speaking with the engineers, the borough engineers, which is the fire department, the chiefs of the fire department, as well as Mr. Lynn, I know they have very much have expressed their concerns in regards to protecting that rear exposure and having that available.
Without a doubt. I'd be happy, you know, put an inquiry to New Jersey American to see what their you know, position on it would be. I'm sure it's feasible. It's just there are many unknowns for me to speak further on the hydrant alone, honestly, unless you want to testify on it. But I'm happy to look into it with them. That's, for me at least, construction-wise, building it, that's a constraint of mine. And again, Bob's memorandum, we went through it in person with him. on 2 separate occasions, and the majority of the ones, whether it's difficult or not, they're certainly feasible. They're within our bounds and capability to install. It's really just this one outlier that's posed a difficulty. But that project, I do see your point without a doubt from an emergency response standpoint.
Yeah, so thoughtful comments, and obviously. So I think what we'd like to do maybe is just at this point, move on to the architect, and we can come back to this, at the end and give the principals an opportunity to speak.
And again, I appreciate the 13 system. I think that's fantastic. It's just that this was a major concern going through and reading this, so I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so with that, why don't we present John Sirocco, architect on the project. So John, you've been duly qualified as an expert in the field of architecture. You're familiar with the architectural plans and the application materials?
Yes, I am.
And your firm in fact created the architectural plans for the project, correct?
Correct.
And you're familiar with the property and the surrounding area?
Yeah.
Please review with the board your plans, including elevations, floor plans, and how they relate to the surrounding area.
Sure. I'll just kind of scroll through the drawings a bit.
And by the way, I neglected to ask you, do you have any exhibits that you want to mark that are not already before the board?
No.
Thank you.
Okay. PB 100, the cover sheet, just to go through some numbers. On the apartment count, we have we're proposing 112 residential units, no commercial space. Of those 112, 50 are 1 bedroom, 62 are 2 bedrooms. We just summarized the range of the areas. The 1 bedrooms range from 860 square feet to 1,085 square feet, and the 2 bedrooms range from 1,220 square feet to 1,460 square feet. So we're talking about very generous apartments here in terms of area. The all the apartments except for 16, kind of in the knuckle, site plan, kind of in the knuckle of the building. All the apartments but 16 have balconies, except for the ones in that knuckle area. I'll go through the rendering in a minute. Let me just kind of walk through this and get familiar with the building a little bit. So if we go to PB, I should just also point out that the buildings are symmetrical. There's 2 L-shaped buildings. We presented floor plans for both buildings. They're really, they are similar, they're just mirrored. So I'll just walk you through one of the buildings, with the understanding that the other building is just a mirror. So if we look at PB 200, we can see the diagonal doors coming off the parking lot. I think I should.
Want me to do it, John?
No, that's it. Okay, so this is the parking lot and the drop-off
Yes.
area.
Okay, John, if you can just refer to what plan sheet
Sure.
we're looking at right now.
PB 200.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is the first floor plan of building 1, which is the easterly building, and as I mentioned, this building just mirrors itself on the other side of the pass-through driveway. So the lobby, we have a nice 2-story lobby that has entrances both from the front of the building for the guest parking, Amazon, things like that. And then we also have an entrance facing the parking lot in the back. These two come together, and we have a management office situated nicely giving access to both entrances. We have a lounge area, a large mailroom, Amazon room area, and we also have a large gym and a yoga, roughly about 2,000 square feet for those amenities. And then the apartments start scattering themselves around on each leg of the building. The apartments, just so we have an understanding, they all have their own washer dryers. They all have split HVAC units. The condensers will all be on the roof, on the flat portion of the roof. And every one bedroom has one bathroom, and the two bedrooms have two bathrooms, one off the primary bedroom, a private bathroom, and the second bathroom off the hallway. Here, as I spoke about. When we get to the second floor, this is the portion of the lobby that's open to below with a nice decorative stair taking from the first floor up to the second floor. Obviously, you have the elevator. Just going back to the first floor again, sorry, this is the trash room. So there's a trash chute coming down from each floor into the trash room that's opened up to the back parking lot. So the garbage trucks will come under our amenities, our third-story bridge there, and come around and pick up the garbage in the back of the building. We are providing for compactors, and we have room for recyclable containers also in that trash. So when we go to PB 200, the second floor plan, we see that trash room is located over here, and of course we have our elevator, our two egress stairs, and again that lobby open down to the first floor. When we get to the third floor, the apartments are all very similar. On the third floor, we begin to get to the connection. This was cut off, it shows on the west building number 2, but the third floor has a access, the hallway opens up to that amenity space over the pass-through driveway. I'll show you in a minute. So that's indicated on the building number 2. When we get to the fourth floor, the apartments are all very, very similar to the lower floors. And then again, we have access from the end of the hallway to the roof of that third floor amenity. So we have rooftop outdoor amenity space that is at the level of the fourth floor. PB 204, we get a sense of the roof. And what we see here, and again, I'll go back to the rendering in a minute, but we have the pitched gables. This motif is carried all around the building, all sides of the building. And then we have a flat portion of the roof that I'll get into a little bit when I go back to the rendering. Of course, these are all our air conditioning condensers for all the apartments and common areas down below. And we have one stair coming up to the roof for convenience access to maintenance of the then on PB 205, we have a small, about a 3,000 square foot basement. So this is the L-shaped portion of the building. This is the street over here on the bottom. So this, the water room, electrical room, bicycle storage, and just general storage is located closest to the street. So we spoke about with the water room, and there's no need, hopefully no need for a hot box. And the transformers located, I believe, here on the site plan. They're right in this area. We have the electric room tied into that. And we also have stairs that lead from the front yard to the courtyard in the front, down to the basement, as well as the interior stair from the other floors. So when we start, PB 300, we're looking at the mirror image of the building. I won't go through that. The only thing I want to go to is the third floor, so we can see that amenity space. So when we get to on PB 302, again, the third floor is exactly the same as the other side, and again, we have access from the third floor into this lounge area that's perched above the pass-through driveway, parking in the rear. PB 303, again, we have access from the fourth floor to the roof terrace of that amenity space for outdoor amenities for all the tenants. And then the basement and the roof is very similar. I won't go through that. And the basement's just here on the other side, and we're going to start looking at the elevations in a minute. So here we start seeing the elevations of the building.
And now, where are you in terms of?
Yeah, sure, PB 400. Let's see. So this is the view from Fairview, and this is our main lobby entrance. The front parking is stretching along here, and then this is the pass-through. Actually, it extends over more, but this is the pass-through for the fire trucks and all the parking on the back, the garbage trucks. And what we have done here is we've basically provided a flat roof for the building for the mechanicals. We have no louvers on the exterior face of the building. We have no condensers or air conditioning units on the site. We're getting everything on the roof. So the convenience of the flat roof is a tremendous benefit to the overall appearance and site layout for the building. But in order to counteract that, we did introduce this gable roof motif that repeats itself, as I said, on all four sides of the building. So even though it's a, quote, flat roof building, the appearance and just the overall understanding of the building is that there are all these pitched roof gables. And of course, this is the amenity space above the driveway pass-through. Just to point out, we have 9-foot tier ceilings for all the apartments on all the floors.
What's the height of the lounge area overpass?
This height right here?
This one?
Yeah, so that's about 24 feet. So, you know, I think DOT is 14 feet for fire trucks and things like that, so we're way above it. This cross bracing is for the steel support. So this is a sidewalk here. So our cars obviously won't be passing, trucks won't be passing through here. This is the actual roadbed in this area here. The headroom is a non-issue.
Thank you.
Yeah, again, we treated, you know, we're looking at the sides of the building, the courtyard elevation.
What sheet is that, John?
Yeah, sure. PB 401. And I guess what's important here is to see that we treated all sides of the building with equal detailing, and we brought the gables around the entire length of the entire perimeter of the building. This is really the best view. Okay, so this is the best view of that overhead, where we have the two sidewalks on each side, and this is the roadway with the 24-foot high clearance. And this is all the amenity space. That third floor opens right up into, walks right into it, and then on the roof, the fourth floor walks onto the both the common roof types.
You're referring to the building 2 elevation sheet?
Yes.
John, you sure it's 24-foot clearance? On my scale, it's not close to that. To the bottom of the steel.
So we have 22 feet right here from floor to floor, and I didn't put a dimension on it, but
Right.
it's not far, maybe it's closer to 22 feet.
It's still well in excess, is what you're saying.
What's that, sorry?
Well in excess of 15 feet. is
Yeah,
what
we're
you're saying.
way
It's not an
above
issue for
beyond
anybody.
DOT, you know, it also depends on when we get structural engineering, on beam sizes,
I
things
understand.
like that, but maybe we're 22. You know.
I got you.
I didn't mean to miss.
No, I just, on my drawings I scaled, I'm like, the cover sheet that Ryan did
Right.
said 18-foot clearance, and I was coming up slightly shorter than that, but it's by scale. And the elevation of the road isn't really shown, so it's not really accurate.
Right, it's definitely in the 20s.
That's all.
And when hopefully we get to compliance drawings, but when we get to that point,
Right.
we'll be very clear about the height. And then I think the last sheet, again, is just more elevation, PP 8501. We just gave the materials, and again, these materials repeat themselves around the whole building. We have a stone veneer, we have the manufacturer, listed the actual product name. We have fiber cement hardy plank siding, with the color, the asphalt shingle roof, all the gables. We broke the building up into, we have hardy plank horizontal siding, lap siding, and then we have forward and back and under the gables, and that's this color here. And then all the trim is a AZAC or James Hardy, like an off-white trim. So now just getting back to the rendering.
Ask one question about the roof, please.
Sure.
So one of our few last variances that we have to address is the flat roof versus obviously cement roof. So the only use is mechanicals right now on the flat roof house. There's no other use plan for that roof area?
Right, so this is the roof plan I'm looking at.
Yeah, I just can't see it from my angle. But that's
Yeah,
okay.
right.
What page is that?
And I don't want, I
PB
can't open up,
204.
you know.
So the main roof, the fourth floor roof, has all these gables coming into the.
Right, and I appreciate the effort to hide it. I
Right.
assume that's what we're dealing with.
Right, and
So
then,
there's no other use plan on that roof?
no, except for the mechanicals, we do have an elevated bulkhead popping up. So that pops up about 5 feet, 6 feet, from the roof, and then we do have one, stair coming all the way up to the main roof.
Mike, are there any other issues with flat roofs versus scale plans?
No, it's a variance because I think it was aesthetic.
All right.
And I think John is saying, John, he's taking it wrong. I think there's some compressors on the parking lot, surface mounted. The majority are on the roof, but not all.
Yeah, so when I work with civil engineers on all our projects, we always allow for some compressor. When we go to planning board, we like
Right.
to just locate a couple of compressors on the site plan. Sometimes when we get our mechanical engineer involved, sometimes an oddball situation comes up where they can't get the lines up to the roof for any reason. We're hoping to get all of them on the roof. We just play it safe by dotting some on the
So if you
site
can't,
plan.
there'll be some maybe surface mounted if you can't get them all, but the intent is to put them all on the roof.
Yeah, that's definitely, and we won't know that until we get over that. Right, so the rendering, so this is looking, this is Fairview going right across, and you can see this portion of the building, these are the setbacks, and the parking lot, I'm on PV 100, the front, the guest parking, Amazon parking in the front, and this is our amenity space at the third floor walking floor.
And for those who have the plans, the clouds are the revisions that John made based on the draft report, consultations with the applicant client, correct?
Correct, partially partially your comments, partially the fire marshal's comments. So these bubbles, these revision clouds address his first letters, the first fire marshal letter. We did get another letter this afternoon from the fire marshal, and those aren't addressed on these plans. We just didn't, there was no time.
And John, just to clarify, I made a statement earlier with regard to signage.
Yes.
That, and I see a sign on the plan that you have in front of the board currently. There's no intention to seek any type of variance, waiver, exceptional relief regarding signage. The sign will be fully compliant with it.
Absolutely. We'll change the dimensions to fit the ordinance.
And before we get to Mike's comments and questions, can you just explain to the board, how you came up with this design and why you think this design is appropriate and compatible with you?
Yeah, so, we're a little bit outside of, we're getting a little bit outside downtown Somerville here. And we understand we're in a neighborhood. And we understand the homes in the area. And we just felt that the flat, well, let's put this, if we went to a full hip roof or a full pitched roof, we just felt that the building would be a little bit more massive. So by asking for the waiver or the variance for the flat roof, we helped with the massing in that regard. And then these gables with the balconies set in those gables, we just felt it had a very residential feel to it that would help us fit better into the neighborhood. And then the balconies punctuating underneath those gables kind of soften the massing of the building. So we feel it's a contextual building, even though we are 1 or 2 stories higher than many of the homes.
With regard to Mike's letter that deals with what I believe are architectural issues, and I'm sure you'll correct me if that's not the case. Talk to us for a minute about garbage, recycling, pickup, and trash compacting.
Yeah, so without flipping through the plans again, but we do have a trash room on each floor. That trash room has a chute in it. The people will throw the garbage in that chute. The chute goes down to a large trash room on the first floor. That large trash room is large enough to hold 3 or 4 little carts that get wheeled out when the garbage company comes 2 or 3 times a week. Probably 2, but if the trash room gets filled up a little too quickly, then there might be a change in agreement with the private hauling company.
And there will be, in fact, a private hauling company.
Yes.
Correct? And the expectation is that those activities will be taking place between the hours of 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. Correct?
Yes.
Where was that going to be picked up from?
From
that
the
gonna be behind
back
you?
of the building. So if I bring.
So it's not going to be wheeled out onto Fairview?
Oh, absolutely.
2 nights
No,
ago.
no, no. So if just looking at Dave's site plan again, this is the back. Of course, we rotated the plans, but this is the back of the building. And the garbage is being picked up right in this area. And Dave left the stripe there, well, partially for the ADA parking, but also to allow the garbage to get picked up. So they'll just double park for 10 minutes.
How about recycling?
I'm sorry?
Recycling?
Yeah, recycling would be the same.
Included in the same
Yeah.
process.
It's in the same.
Well, the cover letter said the recycling by the intent would be hand delivered to the solid waste room on the first floor. In case that wasn't being done, I think there's bins that you added to each trash room so they could deposit if they were not. I'm a little bit lazy when it comes to this stuff, so who's gonna go from the fourth floor and recycle it as opposed to putting down the chute? So.
Hey. I'll walk down.
If it was late, I would.
So
I-
other projects,
Right.
sometimes other clients, other projects, sometimes they put a sheet for for garbage and another chute for recyclables. And a lot of management companies find that that recyclable chute just gets clogged up. You know, people throw rocks in there, they don't squish it enough, and they're spending more time. So in this case, we're just putting the one chute in, and so people can either leave the recyclables on each floor at the trash room in each floor, and then building management would take it down. Or in your case, you get a little exercise and bring it back. Every tenant should be.
John, there was a question about whether the windows are single or double hung.
Single hung, yeah.
And they'll all be operational, with the exception of the ones in the common area?
Yeah, even the ones in the common area would be single hung, because the gym and the yoga room are, the windows are really matching, you know.
Yeah, but in terms of being operational?
Yes.
Question about windows, vinyl clad or 100% vinyl case?
We didn't,
They're gonna be vinyl clad, I believe.
I think that's what we indicated, but the bottom line is that the exterior, what you see on the outside is going to be vinyl. Whether it's a clad or whether it's a true vinyl, that's when they do their buyouts in a year from now, hopefully.
There was a question about having a restriction with regard to balconies and the use of the balconies potentially on occasion as storage areas. And just to confirm, because it's an architectural question, your understanding is in speaking to the applicant that there's going to be a clause in each lease saying that no balcony shall be utilized for storage, for drying of clothing or other wares under those circumstances.
Correct, and I should also just speak to the Storm's very successful project on veterans, that you don't have any of those issues whatsoever. I think that's a good precedent.
And I know we talked a little bit about the rooftop equipment.
Yeah.
And the location with the gables and the smart design. There was a question, I think, in Mike's memo, asking for clarification via testimony that the rooftop mounted equipment will not be in public view.
Correct, so they're about 3 foot high. You know, these are small residential compressors you see in a small house somewhere. We're set, I don't know what the roof plan, but we're setting them at the middle of the roof, so they're set back from the edge as much as we can. You would have to go way, way down the road from crazy angles to see the rooftop. I won't say you're not going to see the rooftop at all, but not from there.
And then finally, I believe Mike made a comment about considering whether generators can be installed on the roof.
We don't like doing that. It's a wood frame building, the vibration, you know, the generators will go off once a week, they have to be tested. They go off once a week for about a half an hour. Make sure they're in proper shape. We don't like the vibration. We would prefer to locate them on the ground.
So I believe we addressed all of the architecturally related questions that were contained in Mike's August 16th memo. I apologize if I missed any.
The basement, there was a question about prohibiting electric bikes in the bike racks. And this was Fire Marshal dovetail question.
Okay.
That's, John, it was you, and there was some performance questions about ventilation. I think the Fire Marshal raised for those areas.
Yeah, we have no problem doing that. And we don't want EV bikes in the building, absolutely not.
Mike's architectural comments, item number 3, talks about the kitchen exhaust and not showing fenced closed dryers.
Yeah, so we added more little exhaust, you know, this 4x4 exhaust. We do, I believe, we show the proper amount now. We show one for the kitchen, one for the washer dryer, and for the bathroom.
Are they gonna be color matched?
Yeah, well, whatever surface they're up against. And they're indicated on the elevations.
Okay, then you had a question about, number 9, about, looters.
It's the boots, John, putting the boots to protect the lower 5 feet, which is in the plumbing code now.
Oh, yeah, I believe we indicated that.
Yeah, the cloud, you show a detail, I think I asked for additional, but you're
Oh,
showing.
yeah, we'll be, in the compliance, to get to that point, it would be more than provide,
Right.
cut sheets,
Just so the board knows, I've been saying this for over 10 years, now it's in the plumbing code. I've been saying lower 2-3 feet, and then it was pointed out to me, well, the code just changed, now it's 5 feet.
Okay, a lot of comments, just wanna make sure we got them all. Floor material, okay, a lot of these you put the answers down, so I guess you've addressed just about all of them.
Yeah, Mike's review was very good. We believe we addressed all of them, and if we missed anything or didn't provide enough detail, we'll definitely work with Mike.
The italics is what the cover letter
Yes.
is, that I do believe Ryan put together towards this response, correct?
The majority of the cover letter, yeah, with input from our professionals, but I did draft,
Right.
the cover letter.
Okay, any questions from the board? Thanks, John.
Thank you, John. So with that, I'll call Gary Dean.
Gary?
So just to confirm this evening, Gary's going to be providing expert traffic engineering testimony and expert professional planning testimony. So Gary, why don't we, I'm sorry, it's okay. So Gary, why don't we, actually, as I asked each one of the prior witnesses, you're familiar with the plans and the proposed development for this application, correct?
Yes, I am.
And you're familiar with the property and the surrounding area?
Correct.
And then you also submitted a July 12, 2023 traffic impact assessment, correct?
That is correct.
So before we get to your professional planning testimony, why don't we first address driveway circulation, traffic, parking impacts with regard to this project?
Sure, I'll do my best to be as succinct as possible. Our traffic study sets forth the results of counts that are typically done as part of a traffic impact analysis. They were done shortly after we were retained last November, during periods of fair weather when schools were in session, so certainly believed to be representative of typical conditions. And those counts were conducted at the intersection nearest the subject property, which is at James and Fairview. I would characterize from those findings, and traffic engineers we speak in terms of peak hour impacts. By way of identification, our counts in the morning revealed that the time when traffic was heaviest was 7:15 to 8:15 in the morning. And roughly speaking, there were maybe 60 to 70 vehicles traveling east-west on Fairview and right around 50 or so on James. And the same as at night. So in terms of what fellow professionals look at, I would characterize that activity as very light. 60 cars an hour is about 1 minute. And I won't ask you to sit here for a whole minute, but if you were, it would seem like an eternity and there's just not a lot of traffic. As a result, obviously the development of this property is going to change those traffic characteristics. By eliminating the prior industrial manufacturing use, I think it's certainly trading off those types of characteristics of employee arrivals and departures and heavy truck traffic and the like with traffic that is better or more compatible with the residential neighborhood. We then made a forecast of the projected traffic associated with the building. We do that for the benefit of the public, principally is by looking at studies of other buildings, where traffic engineers have gone out and collected data at driveways for, in this case, what's known as a mid-rise apartment building. And there's often a misunderstanding or a perception that with 112 units, everyone leaves at once, and there are 2 cars per household, so 200 cars leave at once. Well, that's never been the case. We have people that work at nights or different work schedules, or since the pandemic, people who work at home. And there are people who leave at 6 in the morning and 7, and some that leave at 9. And as a result, we focus on when that traffic is heaviest. But this project would generate about 40 vehicles an hour, maybe a few more at night, upwards of 50. And yes, that when we contrast that with the activity on Fairview, it is more traffic. But the important measure of impact is, can the infrastructure handle it? Were the roads designed to accommodate that type of traffic? And more importantly, when the zoning was created, was that study undertaken to consider those impacts? And in my opinion, as is properly done in a zoning and planning context, yes. So as a permitted use in the zone, these traffic impacts are certainly anticipated. The measure of those impacts, and we perform what we call a level of service analysis, which is a traffic engineering term to, in essence, grade intersection operations. And we as drivers experience delay when we wait at a light or at a traffic signal, and that range of delay that we experience is the best level of service is A, kind of like a report card, and F is a level of service where we typically find congestion or a breakdown in the system. I'm very pleased to say, and again, it's reflective of the very light traffic in this immediate neighborhood, that we have exceptional levels of service A during peak hours. The addition of the site traffic is not expected to alter that. And that's at the intersection immediately adjacent to the site, where arguably we might have the highest concentration of traffic. As that traffic works its way through the system and becomes more diluted, if you will, at any other location, the impacts will even become less significant. So in terms of overall traffic impacts, yes, there's no disguising that development of the site will add traffic to the system, but fortunately it is not of such a magnitude where those impacts would be perceptible or have any kind of effect on the experience drivers might encounter in the area. And in terms of the final parts to our traffic study, we did review the on-site circulation. You've heard described by Mr. Stiers. We feature basically a horseshoe-type driveway at the front of the property, where ingress is accommodated to the west, egress is accommodated to the east, closer to James Street. That promotes a uniform one-way traffic flow through the building. In the very front, if you will, or should I say in the north side of the main portion of the building, you'll see angled parking spaces, and those are designed to reinforce that one-way traffic flow. And we have the code requirement handicapped accessible spaces also at the elbows or corners, if you will, of that horseshoe. The majority of the parking is behind the building. And if I can maybe, well, I'm not ready to go to planning yet. In terms of overall access, I've independently reviewed it. It meets all of the appropriate criteria under the residential site improvement standards, which, notwithstanding that there are certain code requirements of the borough in your ordinance as well as redevelopment plan, the RSIS criteria also provide guidance and in effect become the ordinance in terms of design. The curb radii that are featured at the driveway on Fairview actually don't meet RSIS. So even though I know there's some concerns about the width of that apron, they have been reduced. In my opinion, we do need a de minimis exception, but we are moving closer in spirit to the desire, presumably, of your ordinance, which is to have better pedestrian access by narrower driveways and smaller curb returns. And as you've heard, we need the 24 feet to provide the sufficient back out area for the parking spaces as I described at the elbows. And beyond that, they're appropriate for dimensions for firefighting apparatus, which require the use of outriggers for aerial equipment, and they need a minimum of 18 feet on supported pavement. Most fire companies are seeking 20 and sometimes more, and so for that fire access to the site, we have proposed the dimensions you see on the plan, which do require relief from the maximum width. The interior parking all meets the RSIS designs with 9 by 18 spaces, 24-foot minimum aisles, and provide two-way circulation throughout the building. And we have shown the required electric vehicle parking spaces. And that's all I have in the way of traffic.
Okay, so let me just clean up a couple of things. So you, based on your review of the site design and geometry, you believe that the design is safe and efficient in the interest of public safety?
Yes, I do.
And you believe that the site's capable of accommodating the proposed traffic volume associated with this residential use?
I do.
correct?
And the overwhelming majority of site traffic will be associated with automobile traffic. There will obviously be move in and move out for 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. That is typically done with traditional U-Haul trucks, the biggest of which is a 26-foot U-Haul. And that can be accommodated again within the oversized loading and parking spaces at the elbows, as I've described, of the internal horseshoe type road. Tractor trailers would never need to access the site, and the only larger vehicles would be the fire apparatus, which Mr. Stiers has covered.
Moving on, Gary, to Mike's report that deal specifically with traffic and circulation issues. There's a question about the applicant verifying that charging from both sides of a dual charging area can occur at the same time.
I don't understand that question. The equipment that's provided is a single pedestal. ChargePoint is one such vendor. I don't know how the applicant will ultimately contract with a vendor for that equipment, but typically think of it as a gas pump. It has 2 hoses on 1 dispenser, and so located in between those 2 parking spaces, the cords are long enough to fit on either side of the vehicle wherever the plug is. And those cords are usually 15 feet long,
Right.
so it can certainly get around to where it needs to be on the car.
That's not how supercharging works, Gary.
These would, if I can, these would not be superchargers.
I know, but superchargers, you have 2 hoses, but only one can be used at a time. So I'm just getting on to make sure that when you have the 2 handles, you're saying they both can provide 240, 50 amp juice from both at the same time. That's what I'm getting at.
Understood, and for the board and public's edification, there are 3 tiers of charging equipment for electric vehicles. The first is called level 1. I characterize those as, and I've had an electric vehicle for 10 years, so I've kind of been through all the different permutations of how they're wired and how they function. The level 1 charger is basically a household outlet, 120 volts, 15 or 20 amp at best. They charge the vehicle at a rate of about 2 or 3 miles of range per hour. So even overnight, the most someone might put in their car is, say 16 miles at best, maybe 24 miles of range. Not very worthwhile. The EV standards that are required would be for level 2 equipment, which is 220 or 240 volt with up to 50 amp service. Those can provide charging at a much higher rate, generally around 30 miles per hour of charging, and that'll basically fill up a resident's tank overnight, if you will. The third type is the Tesla charging, which is 480 volt and 300 amp service. It requires special electrical equipment, which would not be brought onto the site, and it is not required under the EV ordinance. So we would be with the level 2, which does have the 2 cables, single pedestal type, not the Tesla type. And this is what we see, in parking lots, as more multifamily buildings are being constructed, but they would not be the Tesla type of direct current charging equipment.
And although you spend considerable time talking about number of parking spaces and compliance with RSIS, and number of charging stations, I think there was just a question, just for cleanup. I think Mike asked for some testimony as to whether the proposed number of parking spaces can accommodate the proposed 112 apartments.
Well, the answer is yes, they do meet the code requirements, partly by those requirements are under the RSIS standards, which require 1.8 for 1 bedroom and 2 spaces for 2 bedroom. And then once we do all the math and then we have, I'll say, the requirement of the electrical vehicle spaces, and that's a state law signed in, I think, 2021. The authors of that law said for each EV space that a property owner puts in, they get a credit. They get a 2-for-1 credit for those spaces, and those can be used as quote-unquote spaces in terms of meeting the requirements of various ordinances. And with those credits associated with the EV spaces, we will comply with the prescribed number of parking spaces.
And as traffic engineer, you're not concerned at all about whether the proposed project would be accommodated by the number of spaces proposed, correct?
It's a code requirement, so the applicant is obligated to follow those standards.
And with regard to the loading spaces, there was a question about the anticipated size of delivery trucks used for tenants moving in.
Correct, and I covered that again. It's single unit trucks, not articulated tractor trailers, and again, given the size of 1- and 2-bedroom apartments, the U-Haul type single unit truck would adequately meet those needs.
So I think that covers all of Mike's traffic or circulation related questions before we go to planning. Anything else?
Just one, I understand Gary put modeling all that James in Fairview, and he has the basically no impact. But some of the traffic is going to go westbound to Lozier. And I understand why he didn't do it, probably because it was such a small component that it wasn't worth addressing. But I'm just asking for some testimony that that intersection of Fairview and Lozier, for those leaving the site and going westbound, westbound, not eastbound, westbound, heading west, they'll be hitting that intersection. Either go out and you go right to the intersection that they studied, or you go left. So I'm just hoping Gary could comment on that Lozier and Fairview intersection.
If board members have our traffic report from July on figure 4, which is after the written text, they're not numbered. We call that site-generated traffic volumes, and that is a little diagram that shows where the site is. It shows James Street, it shows Fairview, and it shows the lefts and rights as we projected them to travel to and from the site. In just reviewing the roadway network and looking at the street, the patterns of traffic on the street, which give us a little indication of how our neighbors are traveling northeast, south. We assumed our traffic would be 50-50. So 50% of it would go east towards James, 50% of it could go west towards Lozier. By logic, when we study the intersection nearest the site, if we find that there's no impact, by having done this enough times and looking at the maximum impact, which is in one direction, say 15 cars that would wind up at Lozier, again, putting it to that test of what does that mean to a driver? Well, it's one car, not every 1 minute, it's one car every 4 minutes. I can say from literally having done thousands of studies that 15 cars would have no effect on the traffic conditions at Lozier. Lozier is directed with the right-of-way, so that traffic stops. So the traffic traveling on Fairview has right-of-way, would simply go right through the intersection. But it's not enough of a demand that it's going to suddenly make Lozier a failing condition. It's just simply not enough traffic to have that impact. And I can buttress that by having studied James and concluding no impact. It logically follows through to other adjacent intersections.
I can,
if that's acceptable.
I can piggyback though on what Mike is saying. living on that side of town, I can tell you that Lozier is a pass-through at 206.
James is a dead
And
end.
James doesn't go anywhere, and so the larger, I guess the larger question is that a lot of, if you drive down Main Street, you see coming both ways down Main Street, down 20, that's not 28, that's Main Street there. Lots of left and right traffic coming off of there, going straight through Lozier, under that overpass, through Torpy, down South Side Avenue, which we've been working on slowing down. And there's just a ton of traffic that goes that way. So that's that. In Mike's question and defense, there is a significant amount of traffic that goes through there.
I don't disagree, and I didn't mean to suggest that the conditions on Lozier are the same as they are at James, or James is dead end street for all intents and purposes. So, it's would 15 cars generated by this site, or 20 if we have a few people coming in the morning and most people leaving, is that aggregate, as we projected, 20 vehicles? Is that going to affect the traffic on Lozier? And my answer is no. I mean, there's just not enough traffic for it to have that kind of impact. And again, when this use was deemed permitted, it becomes an off-track intersection. I mean, I'd love to charge the applicant to go study it and do more counts. I kind of know the answer already. All I can say, if it's absolutely critical to the board, I could study it. If it's something that the board is comfortable for me studying it and presenting that data to Michael, if you're so inclined to move this application tonight, we can certainly do that. I just don't know, for example, that a light is ever needed there. And that's really the next step in what do you do with an intersection that has a lot of traffic. It's not really a candidate location for a light. So the cheapest way to manage that traffic, and I know I'm going far afield, is for $150 for 2 more stop signs, you make it a 4-way stop, and everybody has uniform right of way. It's safer, it's better for pedestrians, and it adds traffic calm. So there are remedies to that, but it's a little far afield of what this applicant needs to study, in my opinion.
Like I said, I only bring it up because that is, as far as the intersections go, that is certainly more active.
Understood. And we knew that when we looked at this. I just wanted to gauge the impact at the closest location, which is literally at the northeast corner of the site.
Correct.
Any other questions from the board?
So, Gary, why don't we then turn to your professional planning testimony. As you heard, and explained by not only me, but also by Dave and to some extent by John, there's various areas of relief that the applicant is seeking from this board, in addition to preliminary final site plan approval. And whether it's the parking spaces located in the front yard, that is a variance. The fact that the redevelopment plan prohibits flat roofs, and the application, as we heard from John Sirocco, proposes parts of the building to have flat roofs. That's a redevelopment plan deviation relief. And then there's various design exceptions. We talked about the shade trees. We talked about some lighting standards that Dave testified to as being violated. And then also finally, regarding the design exception relief, finally, that the one-way driveway shall not be less than 10 feet or greater than 15 feet. And we're proposing a single one-way driveway 24 feet.
Correct. I'll do my best to tackle each one of those in order. The parking in the front yard. I guess the cleanest way that I've reviewed this is the ordinance requires parking in either the side or rear. And arguably, we don't comply with that. We have, I don't recall the exact number, but I believe it's on the order of maybe 20 spaces, I'll say, up front. And the reason I say up front, your ordinance defines front yard as unoccupied space, et cetera, between the street right of way and the nearest building on such lot. And that front yard, the way your ordinance defines it, is whatever the setback is, Dave, help me out, but I think it's 20 feet or 25 feet to the western and the eastern edges. That is what is described as the front yard. However, we recognize the building has an unusual shape as a U, and that we have the 20 spaces located in between these wings of the building, which are not a side yard and are not a rear yard. So
So while it could be argued that in fact, based on the definition of front yard in the borough's ordinance, that someone may argue, like yourself, that variance relief isn't required for those parking spaces, that we're still going to take a conservative view and still provide the testimony.
correct, and the reason is because we're not meeting the standard of the ordinance the way it was written, which is parking only in the side or rear. I don't know what, call it no man's land in between those wings is. So the relief that we're seeking is to provide that parking in somewhere other than a side or rear yard. And the rationale for it is it provides access to the loading and handicap spaces directly in front of the building and the angled spaces for visitors. That keeps that type of traffic and Uber and Grubhub and all of the deliveries that typically come with residential housing. It allows that activity to operate in a safer and more controlled manner directly in front of the building, but set back far enough, I think, with an attractive landscaping plan to compensate for its location that isn't in a side or rear yard. And I'll go through all of the different criteria under the municipal land use law that speaks to the relief that we're requesting. But in terms of a traffic engineer's perspective, I do think it's better than introducing that activity in between or underneath the catwalk and getting into the rear of the building. And it provides a safer environment for pedestrian access for visitors directly into the front of the building. The other one is related to the flat roof. And I'll have to defer to Michael. I looked at the Kirby Avenue redevelopment plan from 2010 and then the subsequent amendment in 2014. And quite frankly, I couldn't find it. It may be in an earlier edition that I just don't have access to. I do know that in the Kirby Avenue redevelopment plan for Lot 3, which this property is not, that flat roofs are permissible as long as there are articulated parapets to screen the HVAC equipment. So I don't know where the criteria falls, but as you heard from the architect, it provides, and just looking at the rendering, in my opinion, I believe it meets the spirit and intent of the ordinance by not providing truly a flat roof, monolithic building that one might associate with a commercial or an industrial structure, that providing the gables, the relief, the staggering of the facade creates that visual effect of looking like more like individual homes with a traditional peaked roof. And it does serve the required intent, which is to screen the mechanical equipment. And I think those are the only two variances, is that?
Well, right, so there's that's one variance, and then one redevelopment plan deviation, and then there are 4 waiver/exception areas of relief.
So I'll start with the variance proofs, and under the municipal land use law, these types of bulk standards fall into 2 categories. What is known as the C1, otherwise known as a hardship variance from 40:55 70C. And that is attributed to some particular or unusual hardship with the site because of its narrowness or its topography, that the standards can't be met. In my opinion, that doesn't apply in this particular instance. I think we then look to what is known as the flexible C2 variance, which is a balancing of do the benefits of the proposed deviation outweigh the detriments. And what you've heard described is an intentional design of this building rather than adhering to the zoning requirement, which is to essentially shove the building all the way up to the street line at a minimum front yard setback and put all the parking in the back, that creates a fairly massive structure right at the edge of the road. And I think that would look out of character with the neighborhood where the abutting homes all enjoy a modest setback from the street. But by just having the narrowest edges of the building closest, it allows the building to be set back further. It allows room for a berm and landscaping to soften that visual appearance, and it does create the opportunity for this horseshoe, which hopefully I've covered in terms of the benefits of having that for overall traffic circulation. In general, it meets one of the stated purposes of zoning under 4055 D2A, which is a development that promotes general health, safety, and welfare. I think by having that horseshoe driveway certainly provides a better design in terms of safety. Under D2C, it provides adequate light, air, and open space. And again, that by stepping the building back intentionally, it provides relief from it directly being on the street frontage and does provide a more visually attractive, call it front yard or front appearance. I think under subsection H, it develops a transportation route that does not result in congestion or blight, and that's the internal circulation aisle as opposed to, in essence, forcing all of the traffic to the back of the building. And lastly, under subsection I, it promotes a desirable visual environment through creative development design practices. So with that criteria, I think the benefits of this design as have been advanced both architecturally and from a site design perspective all meet those stated purposes and provide the benefits with very little detriment, as I can see, in terms of having a minimal amount of the parking within that interior area of the building, which is not a front yard, but again, is not a rear or side yard. And I think on balance, the relief can be granted without a substantial impairment to your zone plan or ordinance from those criteria.
So Gary, just to sort of wrap that around, so you're relying on the C2, 4455D, 70 C2, flexible C variance, and you cited the purposes of municipal land use law that would be advanced by the proposed deviation. You believe that the benefits of the deviation would substantially outweigh any detriment, that the variance can be granted without substantial detriment to the public good and without significantly or substantially impairing the intent and purposes of zone plan and zoning. Is correct?
Correct.
And one other thing before we leave this C2 variance, Mike appropriately pointed out in his August 16th memo under the Kaufman case that under C2 variance, one of the issues to be considered is that if it provides a better zoning alternative for the property as compared to complying with the ordinance. And do you believe that for all the reasons that you stated, that providing the parking, in this case, in the front yard, should the board determine that a variance is required, would result in a better zoning alternative for the property?
Yes, as I've indicated, I think it provides a better building design as opposed to simply massing it right up along the street facade and then having the same access way between the building halves, if you will, at a single driveway and having all the parking. I think that the massing of that building and the height that's permitted is better suited by having narrower projections and setting the building further back, but that simply creates the natural horseshoe driveway alternative. So yes, I think it is a better design option.
Okay, so now let's move on to the redevelopment plan deviation regarding flat roofs. That flat roofs are not permitted for this particular project. So I know you referred to and relying in part certainly on the testimony of John Sirocco in terms of his design and what he was intending to do by providing the flat roofs, providing mechanicals with the beams. So can you just briefly address that particular deviation?
I think I did, in that, again, I couldn't find the standard, but I do note that in the Kirby Avenue redevelopment plan, flat roofs are permitted, but regardless of that standard, that the efforts in the architectural design to keep that building mass lower, to provide the gables, to add architectural interest, again, provide a better alternative in terms of visual appeal, which I have to believe is the rationale behind drafting a regulation that restricts flat roofs. That the borough intentionally wanted a higher quality architectural standard for multifamily homes that create, in my opinion, arguably what you see before you. And I think it does provide the relief, it does provide the screening that's required, and it's consistent with standards elsewhere in the Kirby Avenue redevelopment area.
So moving on then to the final area that we need to address, namely the design exceptions. And you're aware that under Section 51B of the Municipal Land Use Law, that a planning board, when acting upon applications such as this for site plan approval, has the power to grant exceptions from the site plan requirements as may be reasonable and within the general purpose and intent of the provisions for site plan review and approval, if the literal enforcement of one of those or more of those provisions is impracticable or will exact an undue hardship because of peculiar conditions pertaining to the land. So we have 4 of them, I believe. One dealing with the number of trees in the parking lot, one dealing with the width of the driveway, and 2 dealing with the lighting.
Correct. And there may be another one in Mr. Cole's memo pertaining to the maximum number of driveways, which is also a waiver. So I think that's
Yes.
5 in total.
Correct.
The shade trees you've heard described by Mr. Stiers, I think there was some discussion, and I don't know whether it's been resolved between engineer and owner as to the tree wells and the borough's experience with the efficacy of those, and if it's something that, I don't know that we could comply with the total number of 39 trees required. There is a deficit of 16. I also would like to confer at some point with Mr. Stiers. I don't know if there's room, and again, as we start to, I'll say, move different elements on our easterly boundary, we're very close to the property line, so there's no additional room. But on the westerly property side, there is a fairly, I'm pointing, so forgive me, there is a fairly substantial buffer, and the whole intent of the landscaping plan is to put the shade trees around the perimeter where there's greater area for them so that the trees and roots will survive. The canopies that are shown are small. I mean, I know we get to certain species of trees and the canopies become much bigger and start to create the desired shading within the parking lot. However, in the mid portions of the lot, we're deficient. And again, it's a design option. Do the benefits outweigh the detriments? If we were to narrow the westerly buffer strip, that would give us opportunities to make it up in the middle of the parking lot with not net loss of parking. It's something that could be done. I need to talk to Mr. Stiers. That may be better than concrete tree wells, the little diamonds in the parking lot. We don't have that luxury, again, of pushing the parking to the easterly edge. So other than simply losing spaces to accommodate those trees, it is a practical hardship given just the limitations in the property. But they could be done. And I'll defer to the board as to whether you prefer the tree wells or that redesign as I described, to at least pick up some shade trees on the westerly half of that parking lot.
I think that what I heard anyway was that we're gonna try to get another 6 trees in there.
That's correct.
And I think that's appropriate.
Okay.
So then let's talk about the driveway width, and number of driveways.
Correct. The number of driveways, again, is a particular nuance. I look at a driveway as providing an ingress and an egress. In this case, we've done nothing more than split those components in a one-way scheme. In the world of NJDOT, it's still considered one driveway, and it's not to split hairs with your ordinance, but I believe it does provide a superior design for traffic flow, uniformity, and safety by separating the ingress and egress. And again, for the same reasons stated for our variances, I think it's a better design for circulation, efficiency, and safety. So if, and again, with a waiver required, I think I would consider it to be one driveway, it just happens to be split. In terms of the width of the driveway, I know Mr. Stiers covered that. I will say that, again, for fire apparatus, that width was desired, that 24 feet is needed to access the perpendicular parking spaces. So the question is it worth it, for example, to narrow the driveway to 18 feet, which would be the minimum I would recommend, simply for, as I described, aerial fire apparatus to be positioned in the driveway if they needed to do something with either end of the building. But it would nevertheless, that driveway would need to flare as it gets to the elbows, as I described them in the southwest and southeast corners, so that there's space for those individuals to back out.
I think that's been pretty well covered. You know, if you want to provide access to fire apparatus, and then I think that you covered it. Understood.
So let's talk about wedding.
I understand that relief is needed. Dave's standing out here, I'm gonna have to ask him because I can't speak with authority what the reasons are why we can't comply with the standards. Sorry.
Well, one of the issues that Dave touched upon during his direct testimony had to do with desiring to not have the highest.
We're lowering the height from 25 down to 18.5 feet. So that increased, or decreased the uniformity from 4 to 4.8.
So for that reason, intrusion onto the neighbors and off of the site, instead of having 25-foot poles, as you've heard, the desire was to reduce them. And what happens, you know, when we take this lighting fixture in the ceiling, we put it right above the desk, it's gonna have a lot of glare. So the higher up the lighting fixtures are, the better that uniformity is. In this instance, to keep them at a more modest height, they were intentionally brought down, and that yields a little less efficient dispersion of light. It obviously gets a little brighter directly under the fixture, and that results in the need for the waiver. But that was a design decision that I'm assuming was made during the technical review of the application. So the relief is sought in that the aesthetics of not having higher light poles outweigh that very minor imbalance in that uniformity ratio. And I suspect the same rationale holds true with the light trespass, in that as the light gets lower, it does get a little brighter and it does go off the property and to, I'm just reading 5.5-foot candles along Fairview. Dave, I'm assuming, here we go, that is at our driveway.
It's actually right at the light poles, so, you know, it disperses pretty quickly.
And are the light poles at the driveways?
There's 4 basically street lights running. Equal dimension down the frontage. They're not right at the driveway intersection.
Understood. Okay, so they're lighting up the sidewalk, they're providing for enhanced safety along
That's
the
correct.
sidewalk. So for that reason, we want to enhance and provide the safest environment, and that's why those have been, that technical requirement is needed.
But for all the reasons testified to, particularly by Dave Stiers and you believe as a professional planner that that request for relief is reasonable, given the confines of the site and the particular design.
Yes, I do.
I think we've covered all of the relief that has been cited.
Okay, any questions from the board? If not, I will open up to the public. I will recognize you. Raise your hand, I'll recognize you. Stand up, come forward so that we can hear you and your voice gets recorded. And identify yourself for the record and state your address. Pardon me?
Want me to stay here?
Yeah. Anybody?
Right here,
No,
oh, sorry. Do I ask one or all my questions? How does
First,
this work?
identify yourself and
Okay,
state your address.
sorry, my name is Lauren Watson, I live at 57 Fairview.
Thank you.
Is it one or all of them?
No, ask them one at a time.
No, I know, okay. Sorry. Okay, so my question is, Mr. Storm is also the developer of the station house, and it's the same architect, I believe, is the same for Station House. Station House, which is in downtown Somerville. I would like to know how this particular property is different from Station House, as opposed to being in a residential area. So how did the architect change this design for a residential area? How is this design different from the Station House? That's the question.
Sure.
Okay, thanks. John?
Wait, John.
So there were some significant differences between the two. One of them is Station House provided underground parking. The other significant difference is that we provided a courtyard somewhat behind the front portion of the building, kind of enter into a passageway into a courtyard, which is very different than this area where we purposely kind of opened up our design and kind of created this view and this nice landscape front yard on Fairview. So it's two very different approaches to design.
Are you satisfied?
Yes. Okay. The architect stated that he added balconies as a way to make it fit with the neighborhood. Does the architect know how many houses in the neighborhood have balconies?
I'm not sure I said the balconies allow us to fit into the neighborhood. I think I mentioned that the balconies just soften the massing of the building by creating voids underneath the gable portion. Not that it necessarily reflects what's going on in the neighborhood.
Okay. Okay. My next question is, I think it was the engineer said that these 5 streetlights on Fairview, and correct me if I misunderstood, said it would do 0% light onto the homes on the north side of Fairview. How is that calculated? How can you say these lights will provide no light onto the homes on the north side of Fairview? That's my question. How do you know?
There's a foot candle study based on the lighting design, and it gives the intensity at the ground level and a grid throughout the property, and then when it out into the street. And at the curb line on the north side of Fairview Avenue, it was 0.0 foot candles.
So these lights will not shine into my home?
Now they will
And we can test that.
Okay.
And if it turns out that that's not correct, there are mechanical means to shield the lights,
Okay,
which
thank you.
can be retrofitted.
Okay, thank you. My next question, I don't know who to direct it to. I don't understand why the exit and entrance to this building could not be on James Street. Why was it on Fairview? Why is it on Fairview? Why is it not on James?
Well, James Street is only a public street. a certain distance into James Street. I don't know how many feet, a couple of hundred feet into James Street, if you have a private driveway as part of that other development.
I don't get that because when I walk that, because I walk it all the time, that old decrepit boundary building, it goes like all the way back. So I don't understand why you can't, I don't understand that. I don't understand why the driveway can't be on James.
Just past their gate, it goes private.
Okay,
So
can you show me please? It's really hard to tell back there, so.
this is the face of that masonry building.
Dave, I'm
North
sorry,
side.
Dave, I'm being a pain. You're referring to A1,
Yes.
you're pointing to the eastern side of
Eastern
the
side.
development.
Yes, and in the eastern building, the proposed eastern building, there's a line on the east side, which is the north side of the masonry building on the subject property. And just to the east of that is the terminus of James Street. So south of that is public right of way and it's private from that point north.
I'm sorry, you have to
Or
show
south.
me again, I don't get it.
North
Sorry.
of that is public.
Yeah, north is backwards. So this is the terminus of James Street. James Street is public from very down to that point,
Okay,
and then it's private property for that.
so there was not enough room to put the driveways there. Potentially, could the driveways have been put there? Was there enough room? That's what I would like to know.
It would have to be a complete redesign.
Correct, but could you put do the driveways fit on that portion of
I'm
James?
a site engineer, I can do that, yes.
Okay, thank you, okay. My next question is,
You're beginning to run out of time.
oh shoot, it's only 5 minutes, I'm so sorry. Okay, thank you, that's it for me. Thanks, sorry.
Anyone else?
We have one,
Yes, ma'am.
just one, I promise, it'll be quick. Dr. Chris Liverpool, I live at 59 Fairview. I will say I've only been in Somerville for about 2 years. So this is all new to me, it's all new to my family. But I am very, very, very concerned about the traffic on Hoosier. To your point, Mr. Broom. I would really, really, really like the board to think about the challenge of that intersection and how my 2-year-old can be safe. And how Lauren's daughter can be safe at that intersection. He's the expert on traffic, I totally get it, but I really, really, really think we need to think about this strategically at that four-way, that should be a four-way stop that isn't currently. So my question is, can you all please sincerely think about that? That's all.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
So I live on Lozier. I live in a small development.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
My name's Margaret Clark, I'm sorry. I don't usually come to places like this and talk. But I live on Lozier. I live in a small development of townhouses. And that Lozier,
I'm sorry, I apologize. What's your address?
17G Lozier Avenue. And I got a letter because we have some property that backs onto Fairview.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
So, Mr. Broom made a good point. Corky is it's a county park. And that Lozier turns into Nimitz, I believe, and then it turns.
South side.
South side.
Yeah.
No, it turns to go south side, but it goes the other way and it becomes Bridgewater. That road is very congested. There are soccer games, there are football games, there are all kinds of matches that happen on that road. Park View, that's down the street, that was built, and then the Kirby Avenue development that's even farther down. So suddenly this small area that had a few houses, one townhouse development is now gonna have, 500, 600 apartments? And people do use Fairview. Today, they're doing work because of all the work being done on PSENG. Traffic is crazy. Your neighborhood, everyone is doing because they're trying to get people to the hospital. We have fire engines that come by our street. We have ambulances that turn on our street. The police drive on our street. It's a very congested area without this development. So there has to be a better plan. I walk my dog all over Somerville. I've walked up and down all of these streets and I know the traffic. Thank God they slowed it down to 25 miles an hour, because I couldn't cross the street. A stop sign, a four-way stop, people don't even know how to drive four-way stops. They cut each other, it's good, it will be accidents like at Cliff. And I've lived on this street for 15 years. There's been 3 fires on that street. 3 fires just on Fairview in the time I've lived there. Christmas, before I moved there, a family told me they lost their house, and then what happened down at Parkview. So I'm very concerned what's gonna happen with this development being put in the way it's designed. I think there should be a better plan. I think townhouses would be better than apartments, places that people could own and claim and be part of the neighborhood. Because all these people here are families that live in that neighborhood, including me, and little children. There's a lot of little children now in that neighborhood, which is good for us. But if we get congested, people are gonna leave. This is a nice town, I raised my son here, I'm fortunate he grew up. And I'm very concerned about this development not fitting in. I'm looking at the design. I'll be honest, initially I thought it would be beautiful because I walk back there. But the way it's set up, the way the houses and the way we live in the neighborhood, it's gonna overwhelm us. So I don't really have a question, I just have a comment.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Hi, I'm Catherine Santos. I live at 79 Fairview Avenue. I also work in town for an architecture firm. I prepared just a scale representation of what you guys are looking at as proposing. These are all of our homes as they stand. This is the scale of the building in relation to I used the architecture reference drawings to 3D model and frame the building. So that just kind of gives you an idea of how this building sits on the site in relation to the surrounding homes. If you'll notice, the lounge, even just in its mass, is bigger than my own house. It's huge. It's big. We are single-family dwellings, with the exception of the parks, but that property is set behind other residential homes. I understand that there's only 4 variants that are being required or asked of. I just think that in general, this building, even with the setback that it already has, even with the U-shaped design, in order to accommodate, a little bit of breathing room from us, this is still a very large building. Now I understand that Storms would like to, the Storm family would like to have this property in order to make income, generationally income, right? Well, we also are residents that live here and have put all of our hard-earned money into producing the ability to purchase these homes. We've saved, and we understand that for the greater good of our street, redevelopment is necessary, right? It's a really ugly, dilapidated building, and we get that. But there's also open fields. There's no light. There's no sound. It's very peaceful on the street. We feel like we're kind of giving that up. I guess the question that I have for the architect would be, in the preparation of your rendering, at what viewpoint were you posing the camera? Because you call this street view, but it does appear like that was taken through potentially someone's backyard as opposed to the front of the street in order to get the massing scale down for the building. So do you know at what distance away from the building your camera angle was when taking that rendering?
Yeah, wait, first of all, which rendering are you?
I'm referring to the rendering that is on the cover sheet, which is PV 100, and that is the street view rendering as indicated on the drawing.
So, in order for the board and members of the public to get a grasp of the overall project, without a doubt, we are stepping further west from the sidewalk on Fairview, and I think you're somewhat accurate. I couldn't tell you exactly where we're standing, but it would be similar to standing in the rear yard. The other option would be to stand on the sidewalk your kid was very.
I know.
It's really.
She's mad, she wants to come up here.
Poor kid, it's really amazing. So if we did stand on the Fairview sidewalk and try to capture the entire building, we would have to do a wide angle, which would distort everybody's understanding of the building.
But
So,
potentially be in perspective, which when you're a human being standing on the street and you're looking at this building, it's gonna be like that, arguably, just.
well, portions of the building and a good, a good chunk of the building is set back significantly from Fairview.
And then, a comment slash, I guess, the building was, obviously this is the design you came up with based on hopefully other options. Were there other options that were considered before you guys were settled on this option? As far as the site and architecture, please.
Yeah, so David, Storm's family and myself, we spent a considerable amount of time exploring different options.
Right, so if this is north, I'm sorry, let me tell you what drawing I'm looking at. I'm looking at the rendering site plan from the civil package. Okay.
You're referring to A1.
A1, sorry, thank you, sir. So if we consider a sun in this plan and this massive building next to this very small single-story dwelling and her garage, this entire building will never get morning sun. It won't get afternoon sun either because there's trees in her yard. Should she have to take her trees down in order to get sun in the yard? I don't know. And then lastly, the only thing that I have to say is that in regards to the additional traffic patterns, was it taken into consideration the new construction that's being done on Kirby?
Yes.
Okay,
We were involved with that site as well.
that's fine. I just wanted to make sure that it was taken into consideration that it's compounding, because trying to make a left-hand turn on any of those streets to go towards Main Street is near impossible, which would then dump everybody off at the only light intersection that's in town, which is Gaston Ave. And that light to turn left is the shortest light you'll ever, like, in Somerville. So I don't know if that's something that if this does progress forward, that could be considered changing up the traffic light situation if there is a congestion issue there.
We can certainly ask DOT to retime that light.
Okay.
And that request would have to come from the mayor and council. But we can ask DOT to take a look at that. And it might make sense to do it, assuming this project gets built, it might make sense to do it after it gets built so that we can see better how traffic is flowing.
And do I have time to just ask one more question?
Okay.
Okay. Is it possible to, I understand that the design is the way that it is with the frontage that's being required, but is there any possibility of configuring the building so it's a little farther back? I was talking about Roberta's house. If we were to push the building back and reallocate some parking, because we're already getting a parking variance from the front, to allow for that breathe on the street that we're looking for as a community.
So we explored that option, and we just felt that parking in front of the building, or significant parking, we do have some parking, but significant parking would really be more detrimental to the overall planning of the neighborhood, and it would be more detrimental to the neighbors with cars coming in 2 o'clock in the morning and things like that. So
How does the neighborhood feel?
The neighborhood's upset.
Because alternatively, if you were to push the building back, you then could also egress on James as opposed to egressing on Fairview Avenue.
right, but we purposely, we did study that, and we studied other options, and we just felt that the most contextual design we could possibly do is get all the parking in the back. In fact, people have been actually walking a little further to get to their apartments because we put all the parking in the back. So there were downsides to it, but in terms of the contextual obligations we feel we we feel we have, we thought this was the most sensible approach to the site layout.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
My name is Paulina Harkowitz, and I live at 58 Fair. That's the corner of Closure and Fairview. First, I'd like to ask the board, how many of you visited the site?
I didn't hear that. What?
How many visited the site?
Drove by it.
Drove by it, okay. Did anybody get out of the car, look south to 4-story monster building, and then turn around and look north towards 2-story, 1-family homes? Because if you didn't do that, you have no idea what this building is going to do to us. It's a monster. The traffic on Fairview, there are no stop signs between Gaston and a block past James, which I believe is Haines Street, 100 million miles an hour, day and night. From Main Street to Fairview, there is a stop sign. How many of you think people stop? I live on the corner. Every other car doesn't stop. I was fortunate enough to have on, my house is the south side of Fairview. I had to ask for a stop sign with lights that go around because nobody pays attention.
Well, certainly, we can request that intersection be fixed that way. And flashing lights have been installed and lots of stop signs around town.
But it's not stopping.
Well, there are things we can do to do that. We can put the rumble strips in, we can put flashing lights, and I think that's all we can do. You're talking about an existing condition. And
right, and which is only gonna get worse when you put all these cars on it.
we need to request from the Borough Council to take some action about that intersection. And you can consider that an official request.
I would also like to ask if we could have Juliet balconies instead of people sitting on the balcony, maybe cooking on the balcony and looking at my yard. I don't want them on balconies overlooking my yard, their yards. Why? Just let them open the door and they'll get fresh air. That's one. What's the other one? Oh, the people that live on the north side of the project, the 4 stories, I have a feeling, will shade their front lawns. Don't they have a right to see the flowers on the front lawn, to walk on the front lawn without this monster staring down at me? Another one is, I'd like to know if noise control on the west side, generators, how much noise do they make? A lot of noise? I don't know.
They would have to comply with the noise ordinance.
Yeah, so these are relatively small generators that are
For
used.
that whole thing?
No, we're not,
They're small?
the generator will not power the whole building. It's just powers hallway lighting, some outlets, so the fire department, if they have to get into the building or ambulance services have to get into the building, there is a decent amount of lighting just to let them navigate through the hallways, through the stairwells. So these are relatively small generators. Apart from emergency situations where power goes out,
They're only going to kick off once a week for about 20 minutes, a half an hour, just to make sure they're running properly. And they generate about 65, 70 decibels. And then we didn't do this study, but there were ordinances that, how much noise can bleed over the property line. I'm very confident, based on experience with other projects, that these relatively small generators will meet those sound ordinances.
Okay.
These aren't monster generators.
I'm asking about sound because 45 years ago when I moved in, I had a motorcycle club behind my house. And we had to bring up the noise. And how they scared the living daylights out of you. You don't want to drive the screens up. That's the noise. Another one, I would like to know if, I'm sure there is a credit report being done on the tenants before they move in. I'd like to know if they do a police search so that we know who's moving in there, because credit score doesn't do me any good.
Well, that's, first of all, you're running out of time. Second of all, that's something that the landlord has to manage.
He has to manage it, but does he do it? That's my question.
You have to take that up with the landlord.
That's my question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else? Please don't be redundant.
Hi, Rodman Pucci, 63 West Orchard Street. I've lived in Somerville for about 15 years. I'm not in the neighborhood that has a number of residents here, but I'm here as a concerned citizen. If we as a town, as a planning board, keep approving these huge buildings in small residential neighborhoods, then we are going to continue to change the face of our town. My kids are in the school system. Many of you either have kids now in the school system or have had kids through the school system. You cannot continue to pretend that this kind of development, 112 new apartments just dropped in the middle of a residential neighborhood, does not create a potential strain on the school system 5, 10, 15 years from now. And frankly, as residents, we're tired of hearing that the people who move into these places do not have children. Tired of hearing that. Young people grow up, they have kids of their own, people raise families in 2-bedroom apartments, and we continue to approve this sort of thing, and it's really disappointing. It's changing the face of our town. I encourage you to reduce the scale of this and make it more in fitting with our town and the community that we live in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hope I wasn't redundant.
Okay, I'll take one more.
Ernie, I promise I have like 2 minutes, but Lauren did not understand that she wouldn't have another chance to speak. Could I yield 3 of my 5 minutes to her?
Go ahead.
Lauren.
I'm so sorry, I thought that was just for questions, so I just wanted to say, of course, we're all here. That is going up literally right in front of our homes, and it's a unique situation. No other apartment complex is being built in a situation like this where it's right in front. I moved into Fairview Avenue 5 years ago. I've lived in Somerville for 10 years. People said, Fairview Avenue is up and coming. Yes, oh, Fairview Avenue. You're going to Fairview Avenue. Ooh, Fairview Avenue is great. I love Fairview Avenue. And in the 5 years that I've lived here, I've had multiple families move in, all with young children. My daughter that I brought with me is the oldest, and she's 7. And we all had this dream. We were so excited. It's so hard to buy a home in this town. And wow, we got houses in Somerville. We're in the neighborhood. We made it. And now we are crushed. We are crushed that this is being built in front of us. And we are not against development. We totally understand that we get it. We get this land needs to be developed. But it doesn't have to be like this. So we're just asking and begging that please just request a better plan that fits our neighborhood and makes us so proud to live here, because we're all sad and now a lot of us are thinking about leaving, which is a huge bummer.
Like, we're homeowners and we're just crushed. And I run on Kirby Avenue all the time and I'm seeing what they're building, and they're building these townhomes, which looks more like homes. And I think, oh, that fits the aesthetic. It's possible to ask for a more aesthetically appeasing building that's shorter, looks like separate buildings. It can be done. I'm just asking, please, let's ask for something better. We're not against development. We get it's coming. Please, because in the end, we're the ones stuck with this. Thank you for giving me another minute. Thank you.
Roberta Carpenter, 66 Fairview. I think what we're all talking about tonight is investment. And the Storms family has made a phenomenal investment in Somerville. And their properties are top quality, and they have low vacancy rates, which I think speaks to the desirability of their properties. And they made an investment in Somerville. They want to make an investment on Fairview Avenue, and they deserve to get a return on their investment. And that goes without saying. But my neighbors have made investments too. Paulina's been here 45 years. 45 years. The day her house came on the market, 58 Fairview came on the market, she ran from the apartment she lived in across the street and made an offer 45 years ago. Laura and I met in the middle of COVID. She and Savannah were out coloring the sidewalk because they wanted to cheer people up. They've made an investment. Jared and Kate, they're veterans. You want to talk about an investment? Phenomenal. I don't know Carissa that well.
Only been here a year.
But she came tonight, and that's important. And so, and then, oh, yeah, Carolina and Bill. Will. They're raising an entrepreneur. Like 3 weeks ago, their little kid had a lemonade stand on Fairview Avenue so he could raise money to go to Legoland. From what I understand, he did pretty well. So these people all have investments too. And I don't know how you balance the investments of the Storms family and the investments of our neighbors. And I don't know if you can do it, but all I'm asking you to do is try. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, at this point, I'm going to close the public session, and I would like to call a recess for 5 minutes because we've been sitting here for a long time. What do we do about the live stream? Turn it off.